Cheers, guys. Apex911, welcome to the Elitist Geek VR news for August 2nd. Out of New York, the city of New York, and the one leader, Hofbrau Beerhouse Stein of Steins. This is a 1 liter awesome monster that I bought as a souvenir from a really cool German restaurant, and that'll be accompanying me back to Vancouver. Also had a wicked shake, custard vanilla awesomeness from a place called the Shake Shack. Highly recommend it. If you're in New York, I don't know how widespread the chain is, but there was a lineup the whole time I was standing there. It was just insane, and the taste was amazing. It was really good. Easily better than any other milkshake I've ever had. Now in news, and not on food and beer, there is a new virtual reality arcade emulator front end that a few of you have mentioned to me. I tried to, with the crappy internet connection that I have here right now, those of you who mentioned it to me, to get your names, but going through the ever-growing comment section is starting to get a little challenging. I was not able to find your names, but you know who you are, and that is for new Retro Arcade Neon. So like I said, it's a virtual reality front end, and what it does is it tries to recreate the atmosphere, you know, for us Gen Xers who from the late 60s to the late 80s basically lived through the arcade era. Well, at least in North America. The arcade era is still alive and well in Japan, not so much in Europe or North America. But there was a time it was thriving. And I remember it well, and I remember it fondly. It was an awesome time. And the end result of that powerful nostalgia for me was building my own arcade cabinet, the one that you guys see in the background of most of my videos. I built that back in 2009, did a 3D render, and then built it to match the 3D render. And it was the first cabinet I was really happy with, right? It feels authentic because I used real arcade parts, monitor, you name it. The refresh rates were even accurate. What it doesn't ever capture, though, is the feeling of what it was like to go to an arcade. Now, arcades could be extremely seedy places, or they could just be a mom-and-pop corner store, right, with 5 to 10 machines in them, right, or a laundromat. Arcade machines were basically everywhere back then. Theaters, in the lobby of theaters, right? But the atmosphere was one. You had a bunch of people socially thrown together, but not really interacting with each other, being very much introverted while they were there. And it was just a weird, unique thing. Sure, there were 2-player games. There were take-turn games, right? You played, you died, then your buddy takes over. You know, he plays till he dies, etc. But for the most part, it was having you be an introvert with other people around, right? And if you were a young kid, often that meant being bullied by teenagers, even if the etiquette meant you were next in line. Yeah, you probably weren't going to get your turn until they got bored and went home. So what this tries to do is capture the feeling of that, right? And it obviously can't. Now, it captures the visual, the aesthetics. It feels pretty damn cool. I downloaded the program and I took a run through it in VR, walking around the arcade. And I can picture having some of my main games tied to that, right? But would it ever be more than a novelty? That's what I'm not so sure about, because anytime I want the closest to that experience, I put it on my actual arcade machine, right? So I don't know how much I would use the virtual reality one, but for someone who doesn't have their own arcade machine, but say you had the controls for it, and assuming you could bind your arcade stick and buttons, that would be pretty cool, right? But for my situation, not so much. But still very cool as a VR experience, and neat that somebody's come out with it at all, right? And also, while there's probably some of you millennials, you guys know what an arcade machine is, and you may even have parents who exposed you to them, they really haven't been a part of your life, because after the Street Fighter II era, they kind of died out, and by the time the early 2000s arrived, well, they were pretty much gone, right? I think there's literally one arcade left here in the greater Vancouver area. Well, I'm in New York now, but over there, right? And that's it. In other news, Samsung confirmed the specs for their new Gear VR, and surprisingly on par with what I mentioned the other day. So the resolution was on par, the look, the aesthetics that we talked about on par, and a few of you actually pointed out to me that there is in fact a top head strap, which is strange because you don't see it in any of the pictures. I've now seen it, Googling a little further, but I've only ever seen pictures of the Gear with the horizontal band, so strange. Strange why they have so many pictures that don't show that. But anyways, where it differs a little bit from the specs that were leaked is really they throw in a release date, so August 19th is when you can expect it, and the price stays the same at $99, which, providing you have the phone, is not a bad deal to get virtual reality. Now, granted, it's much more limited than the Vive and the Rift, but still, it's VR at some level, right? And $99, if you've got the phone, isn't that bad. And it doesn't look too bad. So it's one I'm strongly considering getting to add to the virtual reality collection. But the first one for sure is going to be the Sony. That'll be the next one. And then I'll decide on the Gear VR. So yeah, basically confirms what was leaked a couple days ago. The resolution, all of that is pretty much the same. Really the only piece of new news, other than the field of view, it was confirmed what I had said, which was there was only a 5 degree increase, 96 to 101, is actually true. It's not 110 degrees. It goes from 96 to 101, which, let's face it, that's not very significant. You almost ask the question, why bother changing it at all? Like, 110 degrees would have made much more sense, but I'm not sure what the reason was in the first place to go from 96 to 101. So, but if I come across the why for that, I'll definitely share that. Now, the next story had me chuckling a little bit. This is from Oculus's marketing hype evangelist, Jason Rubin. And he predicts, and this is his quote, not mine, pants-ripping next wave of VR. Pants-ripping next wave of VR. Sounds a little strange there, Jason, but let's dig into that a little deeper. Not the pants part, but his predictions. Now, he is privy, by his own word, to future product specs and launches 6 months to a year plus from now. So he's aware of some pretty cool things that Oculus is going to release. The first thing he acknowledged was the rough start that Oculus had. The fact that they failed to deliver on their shipping promise, and that their whole supply chain was basically a gong show, right? They now have that worked out, and what is to come, he says, is simply pants ripping. It's amazing. So we can only guess what that is, because like any true evangelist, lots of hype, short on specs or facts. He doesn't really say much. So we can speculate 4K, we can speculate wireless capability possibly, within a year or two. He did say there were awesome things coming 6 months from now and awesome things coming 2 years from now. So that would be my guess, would be the wireless type stuff is a little further down the pipe, but the 4K announcements could be very close. We just need better video cards, to be able to push that 4K and have optimized virtual reality functionality that works kind of in a common library or SDK setting. None of this VR works, which is so exclusive that it's probably not going to ever be used mainstream much, other than exclusives, right? The next story has to do with an open source GitHub, soon to be GitHub released and Unity released open source engine called, well, not engine, but functionality called Armswinger. And what I like about this system, and it's a locomotion system, and we've talked about locomotion so many times on here, because locomotion is one of those future areas for virtual reality that needs to see continuous improvement, because most of us are already pretty unhappy with the teleportation, right? Which seems to kind of be the du jour, like the common method is to teleport around. The RoomVR experience is great, but without the sort of trickery that I talked about 2 days ago, right? Where you have your subject, right, or your gamer walking an elliptical, but thinking it's a straight line, right? That kind of stuff, there's going to need to be a lot of that to make RoomVR truly work. And even then, RoomVR works for certain types of games, and it's not going to work for others. RoomVR is probably never going to be ideal for fast-paced, frantic FPS games, right? The Dooms of the world, the GTAs of the world. Where it will work very well is your adventure games, your Myst-style exploration, survival games where, you know, it's a cast of one or a few. Slower type games where there's room for exploration and the pace is a little less frantic. RoomVR works fantastic. We need different methods of locomotion for the faster, more frantic stuff, and that's where Armswinger comes in, because it doesn't use the one-to-one. One step in real life equals one step in VR, right? Which essentially is RoomVR. Instead, with Armswinger, you grab the Vive controllers, you hold the trigger in, and you do this, right? The running motion or the arm swing motion, and that pushes you forward. That's your running motion. So essentially, it means a seated or standing VR only, like the Sony PlayStation is coming out with, right? Like what the Rift is doing today. That's going to be the type of offering that's going to be able to push frantic, fast-paced FPS games, right? So it's going to be neat to see how Armswinger gets adopted. I mean, it's open source. Anybody who's doing Unity can use it. Who is going to use it? And how are they going to use it? So that's my guess. That's my hunch. Interested in what your guys' thoughts are. I really think that's the direction it'll go. The more faster-paced stuff will use the, you know, running in the same spot or standing seated type VR locomotion, and the slower games will use one-to-one type locomotion. So that's Armswinger, and look for that. It will be released open source, Unity, and GitHub. And there's going to be the link, the usual link below. And the last story we want to talk about has to do with Tilt Brush. And Tilt Brush has finally had an update. It's been a while since it had a significant upgrade. And the latest upgrade adds several brushes. There's about 14 new brushes. Some of those brushes add music visualizer functionality to Tilt Brush. So you can play specific songs, and lines and objects that you draw pulsate or animate to the music, right? So all kinds of cool potential there for the psychedelic, right? Because really that's what Tilt Brush was. Tilt Brush was the psychonaut, trippy version of your standard Photoshop paint program, right? And now throw in the music, and you've basically got a one-person rave operation, right? Like That's what it screams for, is sensory overload. So I don't know how practical it would ever be as a mainstream art application, but as kind of a niche, you know, one-off or special community thing, yeah, there's definitely potential there. I'm just not sure how mainstream Tilt Brush with these types of features will be. So there you have it, guys. That's the news out of New York. I will try to get this out again tomorrow, but tomorrow will be a very stimulating 12-hour IT seminar conference. So we'll see. Hopefully it's not that boring. And then I got a couple vacation days, so a bit more R&R. As always, guys, until the next time, cheers.